look and what, I mean, it's all a very political process, what pressures are exerted in that. But in the courts have really, in the strict sense of Judge Stevens' interpretation of the law.
We're doing for time.
You have one more question.
Okay. So way in the back there.
To address the question previous to that one, I've worked a lot with habitat restoration and talked to people who do that. And I think that the most important thing in the communities is before something ends up degraded, to protect it is really important. It's a long-term cost that most communities and people aren't familiar with, is the fact that to reestablish something that's already been seriously degraded is expensive. It has to be done over the long term, because while you might be able to recreate the larger elements of the habitat, once you've dried out, the ground covers the lower elements, and then your animal species, it's almost impossible to get them to come back. So I think the greatest service we can do as we look at these things is to do the homework like people are now starting to do, and address those issues prior to doing any kind of disturbance. It will save the most amount of money. And the research, I think, and gathering and collecting that information is probably the most important tool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, we're now going to move to our panel discussion, part of the program. And to moderate the panel discussion, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Cynthia Curtis, who's the chair of the North Salem Planning Board. I think Cynthia is going to talk for a few minutes about what she's doing in North Salem, and then we're going to move to an interactive panel discussion where you'll have a chance to basically ask questions of all the panelists and get some interaction. So Cynthia.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about North Salem and my role in the town and a little bit of a success story that we have. It sounds like we're pretty much like Armenia and went through the same process that they went through, but much, much earlier. I started off as one of those vocal citizens and joined a local citizens group, and then moved to the planning board, and then moved to the town board, and then back to the planning board. And it was a tremendous honor to do that, and a tremendous experience to understand how your town can be saved and how your town can grow the way the citizens want the town to grow. Through that process, back in the 80s, working with a grant from our Westchester County, we're the northern easternmost town in Westchester County, on the border of Putnam and Southeast and Ridgefield, Connecticut. We based our master plan at that time on some very reliable information about our wetlands, our soils, our steep slopes. We had them all mapped. We even had a septic suitability map. And we created a master plan that involved a lot of citizen participation, all the organizations in town. And it was a plan that was embraced by pretty much the overwhelming majority of the town of North Salem, including those who are interested in protecting their own personal property rights. And from that, we quickly moved into writing a new zoning ordinance to implement that plan. And that was based on upzoning the town. We basically upzoned almost the entire town from the 1 acre went to 2 acre, the 2 acre went to 4 acre, and what stayed in place were those areas that were already developed. And we also wrote a landmark and historic preservation law to protect our historic properties, and we wrote a wetlands ordinance to protect our wetlands. And after that, and probably partly because of the changing times in the economic development of the community, all things seem to have slowed down in North Salem. Our open spaces remained open spaces, and the growth basically was very much slower than what it had been in the mid-'80s when all the pressure was on to develop. And a lot of people started to relax and said, whoa, we did it, you know, pat ourselves on the back, we've got a beautiful town, we've got our resources protected, and we have open spaces. And the developments that were coming in front of our planning board, they were involving large pieces of property, but they were very small subdivisions. 100 acres getting divided into 2 or 3 lots, and there was going to be a big horse farm on one, or a big estate on another one, and everyone is thinking, isn't this nice? Our town is going to stay just the way it is with its rural character, and everything's going to be fine. And then we had an eye-opener. Right in the center of our town, in a very important area, the Crookbrook area, one of these large parcels was up for development, and it was only going to be a couple of lots. But we engaged Michael to come and say, let's take a look at what is really on this piece of property. What is the wildlife, the flora and the fauna? And, are these large developments really good? And to Michael's point of, just a few people, and development is all about how you use the whole piece of land. So what's the difference between having 20 homes on a piece of property versus 2 homes on a piece of property from the environmental point of view if every inch of that property is going to be either a manicured lawn or it's going to be a grazing field for a horse, and stone walls are going to go up to prevent the turtles to get from one side of the road to the other? Is it not the same impacts? So it made us think. It made us think that as wonderful as our town is, and as much as we think we've done to protect it, maybe we better take a closer look at what is really in North Salem. And we joined forces with our neighboring communities to the south, and we formed an intermunicipal agreement to do a major study, the Eastern Westchester Biotic Corridor Study. And Michael and his team came out, and we got permission from the majority of the landowners in the entire eastern section of North Salem and down through our neighboring towns to go out in the field and inventory the birds and the turtles and the salamanders. And that took probably about a year, Michael, and we did it. And we identified that, once that is done, there are other areas in town that should be done also. And I'm very pleased to say that when I came back to work for the town in 2008, together with a new town administration, we were able to bring Michael back in and study another section of North Salem. And we have wonderful data on all the vernal pools and the wildlife in the center of our town. So now the challenge for us is, what is the next step that we take to protect our environment? Because, even though we think our town is protected, is it really, is the main question. And from my perspective on the planning board now and watching the developments come in, it gets harder and harder to make everyone understand the value of that little salamander and what it means to the rest of the environment of your town. If I had time, I would talk a little bit about seeker and the role that we play on the planning board. It is probably our most valuable tool. We learned very early in North Salem how to use the State Environmental Quality Review Act. The important hard look case came about because of a development in North Salem. So we all learned the value of taking a hard look. But we also respect the position of the person standing in front of you with the application, whether it's your next door neighbor or a developer from another town who's going to put 65 units in your backyard. They have rights too, and the most important thing you can do for them and serve them on the board is to identify as early in the process as possible what the issues are that are important to you and what is the extent of the study that you expect from them. The sooner you identify this, the clearer you are, the better you're going to be for the entire process, and the more respect you develop for each other in going through the process and getting what you want out of the development and helping to design it that will fit into the character of your town. So the seeker tool is incredibly important. Don't abuse it, use it to its fullest extent, and respect everybody who also has to use it and spends an awful lot of money giving you the information that you need to protect your town. Shall we bring our panel up? questions. If you'd like, I can start off, or do we have someone who would like to ask the first question of our panel? Yes.
Mr. Burkett, relative to the incredible resources and attention you devoted to both the Warwick and Yukon projects, was there any thought to actual follow-up or monitoring to actually assess the shorter and longer term the actual impacts of what actually happened relative to your investment?
As we get back into the third phase, which we hope to do by the end of this year, we'll be going into a contractual arrangement with the Orange County Land Trust to come onto the site, put together a reasonable monitoring and management plan, and take over what is probably about 120 acres of that site as a wetland and the buffers, et cetera. And we've been monitoring as through the stormwater systems that we have and everything. And we've seen the activity around the edges that we hope would be there from the first phase, which sits up on a rise, and everything sits below it. But as we get into the back, we get a little bit closer to where that wildlife is. But it was pretty well disturbed before we got there, and we think a lot of it's going to stay down in the wetlands area. We've got a 100-foot buffer to most of that, and a pretty clear edge that we've got behind our homes. Dr. Clemens recommended plantings and stones in a significant way so everybody understands where that edge is.
To that point, that is a very important condition of seeker. Most towns that I'm aware of, we actually build the monitoring process into the seeker process. And I'm sure in Armenia you did the same with the golf course?
We did. Through the habitat management plan and the monitoring, through the natural resource management plan, there will be some follow-up post-mission.
Next? Yes.
I'm wondering, since we do have in this whole part of the county a lot of vernal pools that are actually bordered by agricultural land, what the impact, for instance, of the use of Roundup is on the vernal pool species?
This sounds like a Michael question.
I don't know what I can discuss the impact of Roundup on vernal pool species. I tend to, my philosophy is to keep everything out of the pools, including pesticides, salt, herbicides, and silt. And there are a lot of the pools in and one of the big myths that I've always had problems with is people feeling that the pools in agricultural areas don't have value, and that's been actually something that's been used against me in some cases. Well, you say these animals need forest, and this is all a cornfield, so it's not valuable. But in fact, they're able to cross agricultural fields into forests. So agricultural habitats provide valuable vernal pool habitat, but certainly the pools are very sensitive to all kinds of inputs. So I would say not to use any of that in a vernal pool. That's my position.
Yes, to Bill Flood, I just want to say that I know you've got much better buffers for all your wetlands thanks to the ordinances and Dr. Clements, and that's wonderful. But I also know that the big issue was that view on the Delaware Hill. I wanted to know what exactly did you do to preserve the scenic view? And I know there was controversy about building on the slopes within your cottages, and what did you do to preserve the steep slopes which are going to be built on at such a high, steep angle?
The steep slopes were the houses that were approved on the steep slopes must have a higher site plan review once they start that phase of the building. That has to be redone, and we have to look at that again as we go through this process. As far as the Delaware, we have had an extensive review by a firm from Manhattan, George James, I don't remember the name of the firm, but they have done a review of what's going to be planted there, and as we move through the site plan, that will be reviewed obviously extensively as we move forward. And we're also working with the town. I've had some conversations with the supervisor and some of the board members. As this project moves forward, the town actually will have to have someone to oversee the view shed as we move forward in years to come as the trees grow, and to make sure that we're not blocking out that view in the future. So that's something that's going to have to be worked out as we move through this process.
town that I live in, Harlem, it often seems like regulation is not the problem as it is enforcement of the regulation. And builders in particular often will skirt regulations knowing that both enforcement and punishment is going to be minimal. So much so that they may even factor in their whatever fines they may be responsible for into the cost of their doing business. And I was wondering if any of you could talk about enforcement as a component of what we're
Maybe I'll give that a shot since I sat on a town board. I think it's a problem in a lot of towns, and probably the best thing is to engage your citizen and to make sure that you're just not going to accept it anymore as residents of the town. I don't know to what extent your citizens are involved with keeping a watch, an eye on everything, but you have to go to your town board. Your town board is the one that can assist you with the enforcement. Otherwise, what's the point of having the regulations? So I would say get the citizens to write or petition your town board and take it from that approach. Because other than that, you have no direct approach to your building inspectors.
Unless the town board is part of the problem.
Well, you have the power of the vote. Yeah. With all of this, it's really education and communication is so key. I mean, one of the questions earlier on was about wetlands and a wetland law that may be rescinded or has been rescinded. What you have to do is no one wants to regulate, no one wants to tell people what to do, but the more that you educate people about the consequences of our actions, whether it's the water that flows naturally down to the rivers and streams and ends up in the reservoirs, and the water that's seeping down and gets into your wells. I mean, everyone cares about water. Every time you take a survey, water is so important. Do you want to have to regulate every bit of it? And when it comes to water, no. But if you explain to people what the consequences are and what the monetary consequences are for the damages that can occur when you don't take care of your water, I think people listen a little bit better that way. Right now, those of us in Westchester who are in the New York City DEP watershed and we're dealing with the MS4 regulations and the retrofits, we're starting to understand the costs of those retrofits. We are talking millions and millions of dollars to redo practices, stormwater practices that are in place that have to be done over a 5-year period. Who's going to pay for those? That goes back to your residents. So when you tell your residents, maybe this wouldn't have happened if we did things in a better way or if we respected our regulations, which are really permissive documents. Not saying you can't do it, but saying if you're going to do it, let's do it this way so that we don't have a pollution to worry about later on, whether it's what's going down into our aquifer or what's going into our waterways. So engage in the education part of it is my best advice on that. And the more you can educate the people, they'll elect better officials who care about it. And you'll respect the regulations, which are permissive regulations, and understand the value of them. Anyone else have to add to that? Okay, any other questions? Yes.
It's easy enough to make the argument about preventing flooding. Everybody has this kind of problem. A lot of people do. Or preserving aquifers, because so many people have wells. But how do you get across the value of protecting these small amphibians, which seem to be, I don't know, what is the argument?
The argument is what you just made. I mean, the amphibians in these small wetlands we call vernal pools are something that captures people's imagination and excitement. But the reality is the vernal pools, or the small wetlands that we call vernal pools, do exactly what you said. They act as forms of flood control. They act as infiltration for water back to the aquifer. They are part of our whole hydrologic connection. If you look at the number we have, for example, in the town of Washington, over 200 of these. I mean, you just would begin to think of what is the contribution of 200 of those little wetlands, everything in that wetland filtering back into the aquifer. There really are the direct connection. The amphibians are wonderful. I love amphibians. People do. They're interesting. But they're just the marker that we use to begin to understand these wetlands. And these small wetlands, in some senses, are more valuable than large wetlands because of the number of them, and they're spread across the landscape. They're like little windows into the subterranean aquifer, water all the time, concentrating, filtering back down. Flood water is being held. They're an important part of our hydrological network. So they are much more than the amphibians.
We care whether the amphibians were there or not.
We should care, and as a matter of fact, as I said, we should care about these wetlands that don't have any amphibians in them. But one of the important things is we've been able to use these amphibians as markers of the quality of the wetlands. Like we often use biological markers to assess. For example, with streams, we use a whole benthic invertebrate index, and that assesses the health of the streams. Think about these amphibians as sort of like a macroinvertebrate index. We're using the amphibians to assess the health and functionality of the vernal pools. What we found in the town of Washington is that almost all the vernal pools that are there, the roughly half that we saw, are functioning very well and providing valuable ecological services to the town, and not just in having the animals, but in terms of aquifer, water recharge, water filtration, and floodwater detention, the primary really important functions.
Yes. Given that there are so many vernal pools and that you were only able to survey 40 of them, what are your plans to persuade private landowners to cooperate in the study to expand your findings?
We actually surveyed 81. A lot of them were in private property. We've surveyed 81 of approximately 200, roughly about a little less than 50%. We are still, certainly the project in Washington is ongoing. If we can have additional landowners can decide to let us on their property, and we have actually asked some people to contact some of the people. People generally don't, few people say no, some people say yes, and then a lot of people just don't respond, which means basically you have to call them up, follow up, or have a friend, basically find a way to get the permission. So we have asked some of our citizen volunteers here to see if they could follow up on some of the people here who didn't respond, and we do have a team of people, apart from the Red Hook project, which we're doing this year. We have a commitment that we can get onto additional vernal pools in the town of Washington. We will assess those and add those to the database. But it is labor intensive to get onto private property. And we do this in a lot of different towns, and it basically is, it comes down to, you send them a letter, you maybe get a response. You'll get, a couple of them, you got a couple, no way, and a couple, yes. And then the majority of people that you on their property really need that personal touch. Recently, in another town I'm working in, Park Hampstead, we had 3 different nights where landowners came in, had presentations, met with the scientists, and asked their questions. It is a process to get onto private property.
Yes.
Seems to me 2 things. One, continued population growth puts tremendous pressure on the land to satisfy the needs of the population. The second thing is with the current housing prices, it's not so easy to have another $5,000 to $10,000 in price of house to do some of them. So for small buildings, they're going to have a tough time doing this in the current market. How would you suddenly address that, this small building?
I think what you're asking is, there's a housing shortage. There's a need for development and growth, and with all the constraints that everyone's considering to preserve, say, how do we actually accomplish the goal of creating some housing, even affordable housing, to serve those needs? And I think that what we have to really consider is to look at what Dutchess County is doing and look to these centers and hamlets as the places of growth. What we're a little worried about the Orange County Citizens Foundation, because I'm on their board, my understanding is that the DEC regulations are trying to be a little bit too broad brush in their buffering. And as you start to get into hamlet growth and expansion of areas, we have to consider alternative ways instead of just putting 100-foot buffers here and there and just constrain these communities in a way that they could grow. I think it's more of a quality assessment that we need and a real protection that we need from a science point of wildlife point of view, and let these communities grow. If we try and save everything, we're just sort of going to be a little stuck, and I think we're going to end up being forced to a fragmentation issue, you know, and pushing up against that and sort of staying by the road and staying in all those places. And I think when you start to look at these hamlets, and I was here a little early, so I drove through Millbrook, so I haven't been there in a few years, and it's a wonderful place. I live in Warwick, which is another one. I live right in a village in a 120-year-old house. For us, for Millbrook, for these other places, it's how do you grow? If you want to control your edge, which is what Warwick's trying to do, then you have to consider going up. And then people sort of say, up, you know. But I tell the story of my father, God bless him, he's passed away. He was a diabetic, and 72 years old. He gave up his driver's license because he had a blackout and he couldn't drive anymore. And he lived, just a little bit outside of town, but he needed that drive. He needed to be able to get in. He had to start relying on people. As his friends passed away, he became more and more depressed because he couldn't get there and he was too old to move. And so I think what we have to do is think about how do we build things in our centers that attract the people who need to make the change. The aging population and the kids that maybe grew up on the large lots that want to be down in a place that's cool. Because trust me, we often like the same music. We like the same cafes. We like to see each other on the street. So we have to figure out a way to let our communities evolve, encourage them to evolve, give developers incentives. We did some placemaking tours. We walked through the village of Monroe, which has a lot of pressure on its commercial. And they're saying, how do we bring back the commercial? How do we bring back the commercial? And I said, you have to bring feet down here. You got to have people here. And you've got all these one-story buildings and a few houses. Just zone this 4 stories. And they said, well, how are we going to take care of the parking? And I said, I'm looking at 3.5 miles of road around this pond. Just let people park everywhere. Find a way to get there and reduce their parking to 50% if they do X, Y, Z. Bring in a design code. Do things that actually start to craft what you see. And I would recommend to all of you, as you stay and move into this, to start looking at form-based codes. Start looking at towns and looking at creating those gray box exhibits of 2, 3, and 4 stories. What do they want to look like? And let there be a little bit more innovation, if you would, to create those places instead of putting a glass ceiling on your place and a hard end on your place and then a count and then a parking and then a this and then a that. And then say, gee, why can't we get change? Why can't we get a great place? I hope that answers your question.
I think one of the keys you just said was incentive zoning. I don't know if the town you're from has incentive zoning, but it's one of those tools where if the developer is clustering, is preserving the open space, is giving you some affordable housing, you can allow a higher density. It's built into your ordinance, and it's something that people should look at through their comprehensive planning. And it's a great tool for the downtown areas.
And when it comes to cost, I think a lot of what we're talking about, particularly the infill or the more urban or hamlet center is actually cheaper to construct in many ways. Roads are expensive, the infrastructure of suburbia is expensive. As you start to move to more compact development, you begin to amortize those building costs among more and more units. So there's actually LID development, LID design actually is a savings in engineering. So as you begin to rethink and revision what your development should look like, there are real cost savings in some of this. It's just a matter of finding the way to enable that. And many of our rules, regulations don't, and many of our minds have trouble wrapping around a new way of doing things. So I think we could work in our minds to sort of think about different ways. And once we have sort of a buy-in to different ways and flexibility, as Lou said, having more flexibility in codes and more flexibility to design, I think that follows.
The question you had on your list of engagements down at the bottom, public, when you talked about it, you said it was actually top, that you would go into a community and engage people. How do you engage them? Do you run ads? Do you put out?
No, I mean,
often
we start
the public.
Often,
I found the public gets engaged fully at the end of the project.
Often we're invited into the town, whether it be somebody who's here to speak or from another town. And so what we do that person and try and get that person to introduce us to officials. I'm a Rotarian, so I go to a Rotary meeting. I go to a couple of land board meetings. I start to see who's out there. If there's a conservation board, they actually go meet with them. And developers say you're crazy. You're lighting them to the fact that you're going to go look. All we're saying is that we're interested in your town. We may be interested in this piece of property. We're trying to get a sense of what is the climate for change in your place, and whether you're ready to take something like this on, or if you're in the middle of a comprehensive plan that's going to take 4 years, and we might as well wait, and we might have a little bit of input. That's one way to do it. The second thing that we do, and we've done it in some of the larger projects, is we actually do a very large charrette. When we actually get in the land, get under contract, we do a lot of base work with Michael, and then we start to publicize that the charrette's going to happen. And in those public meetings, we try and get the lexicon of language of what our goals are and what our intentions are as urbanists into that community. So when they come into this forum of charrette, the language isn't passing them by and things aren't happening quickly. They can actually participate, and we want them to feel that they can participate. It isn't this group and you all out there. It's more everybody at the table. And we break it down. We might have a housing meeting going over there and a transportation meeting going over there, and after 30 minutes, they're both at the same table because the issues are the same. The affordable housing is going to be near the transportation, et cetera, things like that. So it's a bit of a science. I have somebody in my shop in Monica quickly who helps us pull that together and get out there and meet people. I come through the engineering, planning side of it, but she's coming through the public perception and marketing and outreach stuff. So it's a team effort.
Gentlemen, up there.
I'd like to ask the panel whether they are happy with the level of awareness among the general population, especially the people who sort of gravitate to planning boards, which we've been talking about today. It's been wonderful to hear, listen to them, and I see such a diversity and uniformity in knowledge and awareness and interest among the general public and also among the people who really count. And so I'd like to hear some comment on that and what we can do to bring a more profound and more uniform level of awareness and interest on these topics. Do we have to look at the universities? Do we have to look at the colleges? Where do we go?
Oh, I would start with your town website and emails. I mean, we do a lot of electronic communication in our town. When there's important meetings going on, we have 1,500 names on an email list, and we let people know. Come to the meeting. Your comprehensive plan is being discussed. We put it on the website. We have live broadcast of our meetings. So communication just amongst your residents is the first key in my mind. Anyone else?
When we did ours in the media, we had no problem in the public there at all sides. At the end of the day, I think we worked with a lot of issues, and they were very happy at the end. Not everyone. The majority of the people were very happy with what we had done in the end product. And also, in the media figure of the project, we go to the town clerk, buy the book, the zoning, and it's there. It's all there. If there's any questions, the zoning administrator, I'll meet with them, and we work out whatever details have to be worked out. And the public seems to be pretty satisfied with what we've done.
If you have very enlightened boards, that's why you're sitting on something. They also have to do with individual boards or not.
That's sort of what I've been trying in the last decade to rework with. I think the first thing is to understand that change from sort of old practices to what I tend to call ecological citizenship or ecological awareness doesn't happen overnight. In some communities, they move forward and then they rescind something. They'll move forward again. Judy LaBelle was a good friend of mine who works at the Glenwood Center, who's very interested in the whole concept of what it takes to actually create sea change within a cultural change. It's about a 10 to 15-year process. Now, I've gone back and looked in Westchester County, where I started off in 1997 on this, and many of these concepts and ideas, a common currency in discussion in Westchester County. People talk about biodiversity, they talk about corridors, they talk about vernal pools, they talk about balanced resources, but that's a 10-year plus process. And one of the difficulties I've had in this is to find the sustained interest of donors and other people to stay the course. This doesn't happen quickly, but it is happening. And I think the model further south shows that it can happen. I think when you link your programming with such groups as the Land Use Leadership Alliance, they also project it. There's a lot going on, but I think some people, when they're in an individual community, and there are some communities that are far behind other communities in that level of awareness and change. But I think if you look at the region as a whole, over the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a large change in the way these issues are being dealt with in planning boards around the region. But it's a process, and it takes time.
You know, also you can use organizations like ours, like Cooperative Extension, and if in Dutchess County, we do events. Every month we have some kind of an event. If it's an environment forum, I have a GIS meeting, which I bring, which folks from local CACs and planning boards and zoning boards come. We have a website with a number of resources on there with all kinds of information. We may not know the answers to the questions that you have or concerns that you have, but a lot of times we can point you to people who do. And outside of Dutchess County, we have a strong environment program here. It's funded primarily through the county's planning department, but in other areas you have other extensions. In Connecticut, you have cooperative extension there, and I know there's a lot of GIS capability and some planning capability there. They just put out a new website that is a GIS based website with all kinds of ecological information there that you can use to start with. So there are resources like the cooperative extensions to go to.
I just want to add that the land use patterns that we've seen have been in play for 50, maybe 60 years. That we've been trying to turn the ship around 50 or 60 years of sprawl. Environmental law is sort of almost still in its infancy, but you're talking 20 to 30 years. So things are rapidly changing on that front. However, getting the change to translate down to the local level has been slow. I think we all know that. It's tremendous that you're all here on a beautiful, sunny Saturday morning. But there's not enough of us. We still need to keep spreading the word, and hopefully each one of you will take that message and find someone in your community to share that with and say, we can do this. It's not impossible. It may not be the easiest thing you do. You're not going to go home and flip the switch, but you got to talk to your neighbors, you got to talk to your friends, you got to get people interested in coming to forums like this, and bringing someone with you is helpful.
I have the benefit of being involved in quite a few organizations in Orange County, from the Community 2000 in Warwick right to the Orange County Citizens Foundation. And one of the things that we've learned across all these different forums is that if you co-sponsor events, you bring in different constituencies. And that's very important to the points made before. If you just try and do something for your local planning or zoning, you talk about an issue, you get a certain focus. The only way to get people there is to have a controversy, and you'll fill the place. The problem is they only come in, they really come in like this. They're very verbal, but they don't really take in much information. So you're better off, even in a little zoning issue that's going on in the town of Warwick. We saw there was a big controversy developing around this thing, and then we didn't think people understood the facts. So Community 2000 created some open forums to get the facts on the table without the townspeople there, without the planners there, without all the technical. We talked about it in very simple terms, that we did breakout sessions and look for ideas and brainstorming, all these other techniques that we've used. But in the Citizens Foundation, we've reached into a lot of different communities and tried to do what we call reinventing our places and placemaking tours. We actually met at a place on a Thursday night or a Saturday morning, did a little history, did a little walking tour, and talked about what's going on in that place with people from other places. And just tried to have a citizens-based exchange that goes on. And that led us into a couple different forums, which I'll put a pitch in for one next Friday. It's March 12th at Mount St. Mary College in Newburgh, and it's a planning forum on reinventing our communities. The first one was how to build consensus in the community. This one's planning from a land use architectural planning point of view. The next one will be how to engineer the plan, and then beyond that, we'll get the design guidelines and form-based codes and things like that. And that's, if you go to the Orange County Citizens Foundation website, you'll see that's up there. It starts at 8:30 and finishes about 3. We've got some national speakers coming into that and local. And that's, again, panels just like we did today. We're trying to focus on different subjects. But that's the way to do it, is to mix it up a bit. If it doesn't work one way, try it another way. All right, but you can't go straight. You've got to bring a few things in from different sides to get people activated.
Any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to ask your comments about the recent Supreme Court decision about that.
Will we change panels again? Is it a number of panels?
I think it should be more.
Do you have the title of the case? Do you know the title?
Well, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to know about that.
Any other questions?
Russell, in your talk, you said there's not really much difference between 2 and 4 acre zoning in terms of overall impact. But if you use conservation development techniques or clustering at like 1 to 3 acre zoning, you can't get your 75% threshold in most cases just because of the water and septic issues. So isn't there a difference if you package a larger lot development with conservation subdivision, that it can make a difference in getting to that 75% threshold? And I guess the second part of my question is, I've always suggested that anything between 3/4 acre and 4 or 5 acre zoning is suburban zoning and should be phased out, because we've got plenty of that sort of development out there. And we should go to rural zoning and village scale zoning. Could you give us an idea of what you think are the thresholds of what you consider rural zoning and village scale zoning?
Well, village scale zoning, I would say, for R10, R20, I mean, village scale zoning is really predicated pretty much, I think, on having sewer or some sort of wastewater treatment or some facility to handle it. It's dense. It could be 10 to an acre, some 20 to an acre. I would say 7, 8, 10 to an acre, that would be village. I think rural zoning is spread out, but there's suburban, which is between, as you said. I'm not quite sure where the cutoff is, but ecologically, there's not a lot of difference, as I said, between 2 acre zoning and 4 acre. This spreads it out. So, from my standpoint, if you want to, and I guess I don't know if I said that, I don't mind up zoning as long as it's a mandatory cluster. If you have a 100 acre parcel and you have 2 acre zoning, and if you have a 100 acre parcel and 1 acre zoning, and you move it up to 2 acre zoning, the only way that's going to work is if you force a mandatory cluster, which I think is what you're saying.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah. Right, but I think the more we can enhance our centers, the more we can create those places to work. I mean, I grew up I spent a lot of time in southern Westchester, and communities along which are transit-oriented communities. We're trying to recreate those. The real question is, can we create those communities so they're actually affordable to other people than some people in southern Westchester live in these garden suburbs? It's a real challenge, but I think we need to start to really define our village centers. I think it's got great biological value. I don't have the whole suburban phenomenon, as Mary Ann said. I think it's something we're at the tail end of. We have a lot of land that's been cut up and is relatively dysfunctional. And how we can maybe reuse it or re-envision it. One of the questions I have is, as the McMansion grows out of favor, we have more and more of these in some communities that can't even be sold. Now, in the traditional cities, the large mansions were subdivided into apartments, and many of those Victorian houses in our inner cities or our city centers were made multifamily. I can't see how what we're going to do with this housing stock of massive houses sitting on 2 and 4 and 5 acres. You certainly can't convert those, maybe you can, into multifamily housing, but we're going to have a huge challenge. I think you're aware of that kind of housing stock. keep pulling back and recreate those centers, for all the reasons that Lou spoke and other people spoke about. But what we're going to do with that whole interstitial zone, I don't really know. We're going to have this whole sort of, I think, increasingly a suburban wasteland. We come up with new ideas.
Well, partially we went to quarter-acre lots and smaller. We went to smaller lots, but obviously we need sewer. But also, the surrounding outside of the towns is becoming extremely wealthy. The property values there, I doubt if you see a lot of subdivision at all. A lot of it's put in the conservancy. What seems to be happening even in the Millbrook, Cliff Corners, Pine Plains, if you're in a wealthy neighborhood and you're in trouble, the next door neighbor can buy it. And that's what's happening. So it's going to force it into the villages. Growth, and that's what we did with our zoning. It's exactly what we did. To answer your question, that's where growth is going to come in our town, the villages, as far as the affordable housing and so on and so forth, which makes it sustainable. Correct.
One tool you might want to consider is to empower your planning boards that they can have mandatory clusters. Now, that's what we did in North Salem back in 1987, and we only used it once, but if the time ever came that these large parcels were going to be developed into 20, 30, 40 lots and cut everything up, that's when you want to know that your planning board has the tool that they can mandate a cluster. And it's a very important tool.
I might add, and again, I'm not doing the suburban stuff now, but I know the way they think. Those guys out there trying to do this stuff and make a living and feed their families too. I think Michael's statement he made before is actually a very good idea to actually rezone to a cluster format and penalize if you go to an open format. So if you actually gave people the opportunity to put 20 units on an acre, and if they wanted to spread it out, they lost 30 or 50%. It makes it very clear. And if that's the first part of what they read, when they get to the second part, they'll go back to the first part.
Well, that's the
they're pretty straightforward, these guys.
Yeah, that's the incentive zone. If you cluster, you can build more.
Right.
So,
Well, but to build more, they're worried about that. You can build more, but then there's going to be all these caveats that you haven't told them about they're going to have to do. So just tell them right up front you want them to cluster, and if they don't, they get less. Then they're right there. Okay?
Any more questions? Yes.
I have one concerning radar, the awareness and integration component of that. And that we've been talking mostly about big projects with lots of resources that can be brought to bear on them, to scientists and engineers. But I think perhaps for the regular homeowner and sort of supplied to a suburban area, maybe Neil could speak to us a little bit of the resources that are freely available in terms of the assessment of the area.
Yeah, sure. There's, through, again, this is specific to Dutchess County, so I can't answer for other areas, although I do know that Connecticut just put out, I think it was cooperation between the state government and cooperative extension. I haven't talked with my friend there about it, and I haven't looked at the website yet, but they just put out a website with lots of GIS-based information, which you could direct an applicant or a landowner to, especially if you have a planning board that's interested in looking at these things ahead of time, or as a landowner or as an applicant that want to do something with your property, take some time to investigate the area for natural resources, utilizing that resource in Connecticut, and then cooperative extension and county resources in Dutchess County. So at many of the town offices throughout municipalities in Dutchess County have access to the county's private network that you can log on to and use the web-based GIS resources there. Or you can come to Cooperative Extension and use our GIS lab, where we have access to that county resource as well, and then we have GIS software and GIS data that you can use to do a more thorough site investigation of your property, and that's all free.
Can somebody tell me why we don't see in our area the use of these loop lanes versus the cul-de-sacs? And also, have any of you had an experience of having a student on your planning board or zoning board? And do you know of any in the area other than Paul?
I've done, in the conservation subdivision that I did 10 years ago, what came up was who's going to maintain it. You have to form a homeowners association to maintain the circle, right? And we said we would maintain it unless we could find somebody else to maintain it. And when we got halfway through the community, when we got down by that end, we said to these people, they're going to come in and mow this thing every week. Would you like to take care of it yourself? And they said yes. So we brought the 5 of them to a meeting, and we basically said, you're going to drive out of your house. You're looking outside your house. You have to take care of this. It's yours. Take it over. Plant some trees, plant some bushes, make sure the fire engines will still get around. We sort of negotiated some guidelines for them, but we actually gave it to the citizens that happen to have this in their front yard. You know, be practical about it. You know, people, you can actually appeal to the better part of people instead of having, having to worry about it's going to turn into some wasteland, because it's not going to. And I don't think you have to say form a homeowners association for $15,000 to take care of this quarter-acre piece of grass or lawn or whatever. It can be more reasonable. So please try and find something that's practical. We don't have to make life more complicated. We're just going to never get what we want, I guess is the way to say it. Well, part of it is as I look at these things, it becomes, let me start back. Too often they give it to an engineer, and the engineer gets these curved lines, and they get it going, and it's minimizing the dirt and everything else. I mean, I've actually gone to one town, and actually, it was only after I did 2 phases, and they trusted me, that I actually went to the engineer and said, this plan doesn't make any sense relative to what's really on the land, because it was cedar grove and part of it and stuff. And I said, if you just give me a little freedom, by Tuesday I'll have it looking the way you want it to be. And by Tuesday it looked the way you want it to be. So you have to be able to stick your neck out a little bit and take a little bit of a chance. Part of it is just to encourage a little creativity. Not have it be so tightly engineered. And the way you find that out is say, can you go out there and put stakes every 100 feet where you want to propose this road? The surveyors are out there anyway. Then go for a walk. Go take a look at it. Don't rely on the plans. Just get out there and take a look at it and say, why do we have to do this and why do we have to do this? Yes, it will be conflict. Developers trying to make it less expensive and you're trying to make it nicer, but in the end you can find a compromise. Right? As long as you're trying to be reasonable with him, I think you'll get something back. Especially if you've got somebody in town who wants to stay there and work with you.
What we did is we have, it depends on the degree of development you're going to do. Your road can be small and narrower. We also allow dirt roads in conservation subdivisions. The cul-de-sacs now we try not to have them. The fire departments don't like them. But you do have them. There's no question. But we changed our. It also depends. We don't necessarily have to blacktop. We use oil and stone. No roads are given to the town. They're all owned by the homeowners. The town will not take them. So that's what we've done. Any road. Homeowners association owns the roads.
As I say in North Salem, we've moved towards private roads wherever we can, and we really encourage site inspections early on. Get out there, and like you just said, stake the center line of the road so everyone can actually start seeing the design three-dimensional out there in the field. And the more you do that, the more you see the design will change. Be flexible. Work with your fire department right up front to make sure that what's being designed is manageable for them. They need to bury on-site tanks for water protection. That's usually what happens in the center of our cul-de-sacs, you put the underground tank there for water, so, you know, there's a lot of things to think about, and the sooner you do it in the process, the more likely you are to have flexibility in the design. Yes?
This is, I think, the builders at the meeting. How do you convince people not to put houses on the top of every hill?
We have a ridge law protection. Law.
Is that as a law?
Now, if you are doing an open space plan, and I encourage everybody to consider doing an open space plan, you start to layer all of your assets, your wetlands, your recreational resources, your historic resources, your ridge lines, and before you know it, you have developed an overlay plan that almost shows everything that's naturally protected, you know, and other things that are most vulnerable. And one of the things that's most vulnerable are those scenic ones, whether it's your historic roads, your scenic roads, or your ridge lines. And you've got to get a comprehensive plan discussion type going. You've got to work with open space committees and really identify those and map them so that the community can see how important they are. And with GIS now, you can show the community what's going to happen if there's a cut and houses go in. But you also can work with the community and say, you know what, if they just dropped it down and left that top row of trees, then you could have the development way up there and the property owner could have the views, but you could make it work. So it's all part of that work together, education, and visual.
And there's another way to get at that same problem, because there have been some people, at least in Connecticut, who worried about the legality of just putting ridgeline protection on, because it's an aesthetic concern. But what we've done in our town, I live in Connecticut, and we have now two sets of regulations. We have driveway standards, which are tied to slope, and we also have a 25,000 square foot rectangle where the house has to go, and it can't be greater than 25% steep slope. Everything has to be within that minimum 25,000 square foot square rectangle. By doing that, you start moving that around, you realize that you are forcing the houses off the ridge lines into the areas where traditionally houses have been built. This challenge we have is there's a sensible place for houses on most properties, down lower along the road. We increasingly in our community have people that will spend as much on site access and development as most of us will spend on a house to get to the top. So you can't rely anymore on the financials dictating it, but there are ways to get it through the driveway regulations and the buildable area regulations.
Way in the back.
One thing that's important too in your communities, if you're just starting to develop master plans and whatnot, and I know this because I worked at the Department of State, they actually have sample regulations from other towns, comprehensive plans and things that you can actually contact the Division of Local Government up to the Department of State, and they will provide you with samples of this. So as you go into the communities and you're developing these regulations and standards, that you can see what other communities around you are doing and take a look and draw from what they've already done to save yourself some money and some trouble, and to really look at what's really good and, you know, what's bad as opposed to, you know, what you already have. And it's a tremendous resource tool that a lot of people aren't familiar with. And you don't have to be a member of local government to do that. Any citizen can go. That's what it's there for. And it's really, really helpful. It's amazing. Hi, I want to thank you for all this information, because I really want to focus in on what I see as a huge obstacle in local decision making, and that is a lack of awareness and cost and education on the planning board decision making level. I don't know what the remedy is for that. I'd like to that we're discussing here. There's so much wonderful information out here. Where do we go to get remedies for that kind of scenario? I mean, does the state, does DEC do anything about it? Does the state mandate it? Who is watching over how these local decision makers make these decisions? Because they're actually people that are filling in the vernal pools, ignoring the environmental information, and completely ignoring forces. And so we can have tremendous science going on all around us, but the people making these decisions are not necessarily plugged in at all.
Well, it's probably the case that your planning board is appointed by your town board?
Yeah, but political appointees, they just go term limit.
And do you think if you went to your town board, you would get satisfaction there? Because most of the towns I know of in Westchester, we have a local law that says our planning board and zoning board members must take credited courses, and they must report that every year to the town clerk. It's a minimum. You know, if you're not happy, you've got to go to your elected officials. They're the ones who make the appointments. And if you have to engage a lot of citizens to do that, I mean, that is your first recourse.
And if that doesn't work, where do you go?
Well, if they're actually doing something, you know, approving a project and they haven't done the prerequisite review under seeker or obeyed your own local ordinances, I mean, if you have people who have standing, they actually could take, you know, legal action. I hate to recommend that. I'm certainly not recommending it, but that is the last resort. I mean, you can, you know, the neighbors have the most power to, they have the most direct impact for something going on. But you've got to put pressure on your elected officials. I mean, you've got to erase. How about your community? How well does your community know that this is happening, and can you engage them?
They know. They're very aware.
What else have an idea?
I just like to understand all of this. How does home rule impact power? There seems to be...
Home rule says that your town board has the power. I mean, you have to follow state law, but that's also rested with your town board.
So the town boards take the distance from the planning board, and they have an understanding that they can't get involved in planning.
Right, there is a separation. Your town board should not influence your planning board, but they do appoint them. And all I can say is take it to your voters and change your town board if it's not working for you.
And if it's something major, and if they haven't really executed their good judgment, if you would, in the secret process in a reasonable way, and a group gets together and files suit against them, the town board's right to check. And you're going to get their attention. I'm not encouraging that either, but if it really becomes abusive, as I've heard here once or twice, then you just have to fix them out.
And look up, hard look. Your planning boards must take a hard look on the secret. It's their responsibility. Yeah, it's what do you call it, legal cases that are generated. Case law. One more question, and then I think we will just do a summation. Very good. Okay, I think for a summation, I could do it, but I think it would be much better if each person sitting here mentioned the one important message that they would like to give today to everybody. And I think that my message would be that the seeker tool is probably one of the best tools that we have. If you're going to get educated and you're going to know the best way to protect your environment, make sure that you and that your elected and appointed officials fully understand the benefits of using seeker correctly, the efficiency that you can engage with using seeker, and the results that you can get. And there's a lot of case law to help you, and there's a lot of good examples. We just went through, for North Salem, a major development. We luckily had a very cooperative developer, very much like the gentleman seated next to me, and everything that we came up with and we pushed and we held firm on, he saw the value in protecting our community and being a part of having a community that is welcome and better sales for his product in the end. So it was through the seeker tool, and I really, really encourage you to understand it more. And if you wanted to call and get more information from me on a personal level as to how we do it in North Salem, I'd be certainly happy to talk to anybody here. Lou?
legislature today.
I think, what I've learned from Michael about protecting the environment and all the mistakes that have been made and how much work we have to really, turn things around is very important. But I caution everyone to find the balance that Michael spoke about. Try and find a way when you're looking at these decisions to have, if you would, your own scorecard. How are they going to affect children? How are they going to affect, the middle group of families? How are they going to affect the aging population? How are they going to affect people coming into your town from a growth point of view? What's it going to do to your business? All right? How's it going to affect your town government, your maintenance of roads and all that stuff? You have to look across the broad spectrum, and if you're going one way in terms of protecting everything, and you're not looking at the other economic side of it, what you're going to do is find these taxes are going to come and eat you alive in this special place you've created for yourself, and just hope that you can sustain, the economic climate that you may have in your town, because over time it changes. What I fear about this country is, I was always a student of history and never really understood why. But there was a Rome and then there was not a Rome, right? So we have to be careful, and each of us has to look at our town that way. That's my point.
I guess my comment would be that if you're going to, we've heard a lot about different problems in different towns and different communities, is if you're going to start this process with a new zoning and new comprehensive plan, that you get a diverse committee to do it, and obviously you're going to run into a lot of opposition, a lot of concerns from different people. Our communities, we have a tremendous amount of weekenders, we have the locals. You can't get them in the same room together sometimes without having some serious opposition. At the end of the day, working with Dr. Clemens or other groups of people, the Dutchess County Planning Department, PACE Law, at the end of the day, you can get a lot done if people come together. Even the people that were against what we did. Today, we're 2 years into this process of our new zoning and working through these projects. Most people were very happy with them, and you can see the difference. And I agree with you. At the end of the day, you have to live there. You have to afford to be able to afford to live there, and your kids want to stay there and be able to work and live their lives there.
Just from a process point of view, don't believe I mentioned this when I talked about media, but with Silo Ridge, we had several consultants, and we all had our own area of expertise, and where there was overlap, where there was some misunderstanding, or where we needed more knowledge to help improve the project, we were able to get the town's consultants together to have a discussion, and this was particularly important in regards to the stormwater, understanding the engineering point of view, and understanding sort of the natural resource-based point of view. Let's see what we can do with the land before we start piping. That was a pivotal moment in getting the consultants to sort of understand each other and move the project forward. The other thing that we were able to do was every public meeting we had where there was an issue raised that we weren't necessarily going to resolve in a 2-hour or 3-hour or 4-hour meeting, a technical issue. We were able to go sit down with the applicants' consultants and try to work through those issues the best we could to come back with a resolution for our client that we felt comfortable with. And where we couldn't reach a resolution, it came back before the board. And the board, and me particularly, took a very active role. They were not passive. They asked a lot of questions. They read the material. I think that's a very important piece of it all.
Planning is not about stopping change. It's about managing change to the benefit of the community. It's about listening. And when I go around and I see a lot of people talk, and on both sides of this, there are not enough people that are actually listening. And I think listening, all these speakers have talked about processes to have listening, exchange of information. From a perspective of doing this now for almost 15 years, I'd also say courage. Not my courage, but take courage, because it is happening. It's happening at different paces in different places. But there is change, and it can happen. It just takes a while. And to those, I think ultimately, if the communities where there is such a dysfunction, where the elected and appointed officials are not responsive to the wishes of the majority of the community, that then change can happen there too. It happened in a sense in your community. There was a lot of intransigence towards some of this, and there was a change. And that's also, communities can remake themselves and change also. So I remain optimistic. I have to be in this work. We have the ability to continue to overcome all of these issues and forge a better future.
I would just say ask questions and find out what's important to you, yourself, your neighbors, your community. How do decisions get made in your community? How can you influence them? Get educated on what the issues are, get educated on what resources are available, and then get help when you realize you're up against something, or you've come upon an issue you need help with, or you're working with a board, you're working with a situation, you're working with a group, and you realize there's a particular concern, but you need more information or you need an expert on that particular topic. So find people like Dr. Clements, find local land conservancies, find conservation organizations, find research institutions, find cooperative extensions that are there to help with those things.
And being such a great audience and so engaged. I appreciate it very much on behalf of the Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.